Over the last year, I've picked up various devices that are offered from Apple's ever-growing lineup, all of which reside in the Apple ecosystem. From the iPhone 12 Pro, the Apple Watch Series 6, as well as the 2020 M1 powered MacBook Pro, which I've been daily driving for the past year, to some other useful additions like the AirTags and the M1 powered iPad Pro, as well as the Apple Pencil, along with the AirPods Pro, which I found to be very useful. And in this film, I will cover my experience using these devices over the past year, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But before we get into it, here's some background info. So I've been using Windows and Android devices my whole life. Now let me introduce. And as you can see, it's pretty much been with me throughout my Hot Wheels and Ben 10 phase. And yeah, I've had this thing forever and it's just been an absolute beast. The fact of the matter is, the actual button doesn't work and I've had to jerry-rig a set of wires to actually turn on the PC. But yeah, I've had this thing forever. And I'm really grateful for it. And this was my very first smartphone, the Samsung Galaxy Mini. And oh boy, I gotta say, this is something special. This was the first smartphone I ever got, and yeah, it isn't anything too special. It did its job, and I would turn this on, but I did try to take this apart many years ago, and I wasn't quite able to put it back together. And yeah, it's a real walk down memory lane. And yeah, I gotta say, one thing that both these devices have in common, other than the fact that they're quite really old pieces of tech that are pretty much obsolete at this point, but one thing they do have in common is that they were cheap and accessible, and they weren't bound to an ecosystem. I could pair this up with anything. I could pair this up with a smartwatch or Bluetooth headphones, and I didn't have to worry about being in an ecosystem. I could easily flash the ROM of this device and have a custom UI, and it was pretty much the same with my PC as well. So yeah, this is a quick history lesson on the devices I used. So jumping back to the present, it's no wonder I took to what they had to offer. An open ecosystem which didn't restrict you to buying a specific set of devices, plus with a cheaper cost to own, as well as a higher level of hardware and software based customization. Especially widgets. I mean, they've been around for over a decade and only recently have been implemented into iOS. And on the Android side of things, you could always flash the ROM and install a custom UI if you weren't a fan of your stock UI. And don't even get me started on the cracked software and the cracked games on Windows that I accidentally came upon. And while I've really enjoyed my time with these Android and Windows devices that honestly have served me really well, they weren't without their own problems. Poor updates on Windows part, which led to constant crashing, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity issues, as well as weird glitches from time to time when opening different apps, and always having to go into the hardware settings to fix graphics and audio issues, because for some reason, despite having a dedicated graphics card, for some reason, after any update, Windows would always revert back to my integrated graphics, which suck. The same goes for audio. Despite having wired speakers which I use on a day-to-day basis, I would always have to go in and switch them because for some reason Windows would always switch to my monitor speakers instead of the wired speakers that I have dedicated to sound. And so I would always have to go back and troubleshoot after every update or so. And this would usually include a host of old problems that have reoccurred for some reason, or entirely new issues that I would then have to browse online forums for hours on end to try and come up with a solution for. So yeah, while I do love my Android and Windows devices, it hasn't always been smooth sailing. And so I've always wondered what it would be like to take that leap to the dark side, as many have told me. And I found that one of the most compelling reasons, for me at least, was the convenience that the Apple ecosystem provided. I mean, setting up new devices seemed to be a breeze, as well as seamless transfer of files and apps throughout various devices, all linked to just one Apple ID. Then there are AirPods, which you don't exactly need Apple products exclusively to use, but they just work better. So as you can see, there is a compelling argument as to why people may want to switch and join the Apple ecosystem. And seeing as it is a new year, it may give people a new reason to pick up new products for this new year. Now this video isn't like my other videos, in that it's a pretty big boy, and I mean about 30 minutes long. So I want you to sit back and enjoy the ride, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll be able to determine for yourself whether or not it's a worthwhile endeavor to switch to the Apple ecosystem in 2022. So let's get into it. Before we get into it, I think it's important to note that I picked up these devices over a period of a year. Obviously, I couldn't buy them all at the same time. I am a college student, and therefore, I am financially and morally broke. Alright, let's get into it. So let's start off with the iPhone. Alright, so I think the first thing I want to talk about is the design. And I think this is something Apple has done really well, even over the years. I mean, yeah, you had the bend gate with the iPhone 6 Pluses, but they fixed that. And I think that Apple's really done a good job with the later models. I really do like the boxier design of the iPhone 12 Pro that I've been dailying. And yeah, it's definitely a very unique looking phone. I think out in the open, people will notice that you have an iPhone right off the bat. I think that's something of a problem with the Android phones these days. They're starting to look even more and more similar. Now, other than the Pixel 6 lineup, in which Google has decided to go on a radically different direction, where they've used sort of a visor setup for their cameras, I think there are not that many phones that are actually identifiable just out in the open. So yeah, when you join the Apple ecosystem, people are going to notice, because it is noticeable. Apple's hugely popular, and their devices have quite a distinct style to it. So yeah, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is really up to you. And many people combat this by just placing stickers over their iPhones or laptops just to block out the logo if they want to be low-key. So yeah, that's something to think about. Now, one thing that I truly, and I mean truly, hate about the iPhone is the 8-pin Lightning to USB Type-C cable that's required to charge the device. Most smartphone manufacturers are using USB-C to C cables, which are honestly just universal at this point. I mean, the fact that Apple already uses USB Type-C cables to power most of their devices, like the MacBooks and the iPads and the HomePods, it's honestly kind of stupid at this point that they still use a Lightning cable for the AirPods and the iPhones. It's just honestly stupid. Alright, so when it comes to booting up the iPhone, I think the first thing you'll notice is the notch, and then the OS, which you'll find is actually quite simple, and as simple as most people make it out to be online. You've got your apps on your home screen, and with a couple of gestures, and you're able to navigate through the UI. The highlighting feature here, for better or for worse, is Face ID. Now, while I admit it is pretty refined on the iPhone 12 Pro and works really well when securing apps and payments, the level of security when moving forward with an Apple ID is really thorough. Logging into your Apple ID anywhere results in two-factor authentication always, and app downloads always require Face ID or Touch ID depending on the device you're using. Let's talk a little bit more about Face ID. Now, I've actually never used Touch ID on the previous generation iPhones. However, I have used Touch ID on MacBooks, and I can say right now, without a doubt, it is one of the quickest and most efficient methods to unlock your device. It's always been quick and reliable, and it's honestly just never failed me. Now, with Face ID, it's a little bit of a different story, because while Face ID may be the highlighting features of Apple's iPhones, and it does work quite well actually. On the 12 Pro, it's quite a refined experience as opposed to the iPhone 10 in which they first debuted. And now, I gotta say, while it does work on a day-to-day basis, indoors, no problem, and even in low light conditions, it actually works really great, better than even I expected, and it's much more secure because it actually uses 3D mapping technology to get a full layout of your face, and therefore it is much more secure than the facial recognition that you get on the likes of the Samsung or even like the OnePluses and any of the other phones that have it as an extra option. And while on those other devices, it is an alternative method to unlocking the phone, in addition to, say, an under-the-screen fingerprint scanner or just even a passcode or something like that. However, on the iPhone, it is the primary way to unlock your device. And so it needs to be good. And well, it is good. For the most part. Now, while I appreciate that Face ID can be used for a variety of applications, not just unlocking your phone, but also verifying payments and purchases, also downloading apps, things like that, it all works really well. And just a quick side note, I think that the security integration that Apple's providing in the ecosystem for any of your devices is actually really good. You get your Apple ID, which can be used to log into various devices and helps you keep track of all of them. But anytime you even try to log in with your Apple ID, it will automatically ask for two-factor authentication always. And now this is something I appreciate. This added level of security is something that honestly isn't available on all Android devices, but they are starting to catch up. And on this note, I really got to give it to Apple on this one. Now going back to Face ID, while it is very useful in most case scenarios, we do, however, live in a pandemic. And that means more often than not, whenever I'm going out, I'm always wearing a face mask. And honestly, this is where Face ID's greatest flaw lies, because it will never, and I mean never, be able to identify you with a face mask on. No matter how good the software is, if half your face is covered, it just won't be able to recognize it. And so whenever I'm heading out, Face ID is pretty much useless in most scenarios, and it's just not an option. This results in me having to actually put in my passcode, which Apple will ask. And so the whole process of trying to unlock your phone, the phone not being able to identify your face, and then asking you for a passcode, it's honestly a very tedious experience, and it's just completely unnecessary. And it's in these cases where I really miss the under-the-screen fingerprint scanner on my Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, which I dailied prior to this device. And I gotta say, while it wasn't the highest end under-the-screen fingerprint scanner, and it wasn't the quickest, as there are better versions on the later Samsung devices, you know what? It's still quicker than me trying to unlock my phone, it not recognizing my face, and then asking for my passcode, which I then have to enter and unlocking the phone. So I'm hoping in the next generation iPhones, they actually start to include that, because it is honestly a lifesaver if you are wearing a face mask. So Apple has provided two very distinct Apple-esque solutions, if you will, to the problem that I mentioned. And the first solution lies in the Apple Watch. So if you have an Apple Watch, you're able to actually set a security setting on here that allows your iPhone to be unlocked as long as you're wearing your Apple Watch. So this is all very convenient, right? Well, not exactly, because to actually use this method, it requires you to have an Apple Watch. And for those who actually don't have an Apple Watch, that means you'd have to actually go out and spend anywhere from $300 to $400 US buying an Apple Watch. And I don't know about you, but that to me sounds like a pretty expensive investment just to be able to unlock your iPhone. Now, granted, there are secondhand Apple Watches available online for pretty cheap, but still, if you don't have an Apple Watch and you weren't thinking of having an Apple Watch, this sort of kind of pressures you into purchasing an Apple Watch. I mean, it's pretty smart. It's a pretty smart move for Apple, right? Because they're able to A, solve a solution by, well, B, making you go out and purchase their devices. So yeah. And the second solution is in the form of an iOS update. So the latest iOS update actually has a feature where your iPhone will now be able to just recognize your eyes and pretty much everything above the mouth, and so it's able to actually recognize your eyes and then unlock the phone. And again, this is a very useful feature because it means the phone will be able to unlock when you've got your mask, Face ID will be able to work, but its implementation, like everything Apple does, is a little bit too late. I mean, we're 2 years into the pandemic, this would have been good about a year or even a year and a half ago for everyone that struggled with Face ID on iPhones. So yeah, that's Apple for you. Now, one thing I don't miss about my Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus is the design. And so that I find it really interesting that Apple's design choice going forward is looking to the back. Because these boxier design iPhones, which actually debuted on the iPhone 12 lineup, as well as on the newer MacBooks, are actually quite nice. I mean, the boxier design allows for more internals to be jammed in there. The same can be said for the MacBooks as well. And yeah, I think it honestly just works. It makes the device feel really nice in the hand, and it's compact, and it just, you honestly don't really notice it in your pocket. And this is something I'm not a fan of with Samsung or any of the newer Android devices. Obviously, you've got the Pro Max lineup for Apple, but you've also got the Pro, which pretty much has most of the features of the Pro Max. Alright, so now we move on to the Mac. So let's get into it. Alright, so the M1 Power 2020 MacBook Pro has been a staple in my lineup for 2021. I've used it daily for editing footage, writing emails, writing scripts, and even, well, procrastinating. Now I gotta say, the M1 chip that made its debut back in 2020 has really been blazing trails. My experience with this Mac has been really great for two reasons. The first of which is that not only is this M1 chip wildly more powerful than the previous Intel-based chips that Apple has been using in the past, but the fact that this is Apple's in-house solution to an alternative for Intel-based chips means that it's actually cheaper for Apple and in turn cheaper for the consumer. So pretty much everybody wins. And that's something I can get behind. Now, navigating around the MacBook may seem a little awkward at first, especially with the UI and the touch bar that you have on the 2020 MacBook Pro that just honestly may seem a little alien, especially to Windows users. But honestly, don't be put off by any of this, because once you're used to the UI and the gestures that aid you in navigating throughout the UI, it honestly starts to feel quite natural. The software is Apple's latest and greatest macOS 12, also known as Monterey, and like Apple's products, provides a really seamless experience in terms of fluidity of animations and general snappiness. There never really was a time where I encountered lag, which is something I can't say for the Windows devices I've used over the years. Opening apps was a very smooth experience for me, especially with the power-heavy apps like Premiere Pro, Photoshop, things like that. But what really stood out to me was the seamless transition between apps. It always felt buttery smooth and made for going back and forth between apps a breeze. Alright, so let's talk about this display. The display has a resolution of 2560 by 1600 at 227 pixels per inch. The True Tone feature uses a multi-channel ambient light sensor that's included in the MacBook Pro models, which is able to determine both the brightness of the room and the color temperature and make adjustments to the screen on the fly so that you will always have optimal viewing conditions. And you know what? For the most part, I've actually never had any issues with this. I've always just let the True Tone feature do its own thing, and yeah, I've never had any problems, and it's always giving me the best viewing experience at each time in the day, also putting less strain on my eyes, which I'm always for. And so I've never really had to adjust the screen settings that much ever since I pulled it out the box. So yeah, it works. Now going on to performance, I gotta say, this is really where the M1 powered MacBook Pro shines. So yeah, if there's one thing you should take away from this video, it's that the combination of the optimized software in conjunction with the stellar hardware of the later Apple devices, hell, even older iPhones run pretty smoothly just because of how good the software is. So it was no surprise that I was able to boot up my MacBook, fire up Premiere Pro, and just jump into editing unrendered footage with really little to no consequences at all. This meant I was able to shoot and edit on the fly with very little consequences, and this really helped quicken up my workflow. Now with more complex footage which required advanced graphics, rendering wasn't actually an issue because the render times were honestly pretty decent, especially when compared to the older Intel-based MacBooks. So when it came to performance, the M1 powered MacBook Pro honestly exceeded my expectations. Power-heavy apps like Premiere Pro, After Effects, Photoshop all ran smooth, and honestly everything else ran without a hitch. So yeah, even after a year, the MacBook still performed how it did when I pulled it out of the box. And that honestly is something not many companies can do. So I'll give Apple their props on that one. Alright, so I've shared my experiences with the iPhone 12 Pro and the MacBook Pro, and I know I've spent a lot of time talking about these devices individually outside the context of the Apple ecosystem. And the reason for that is that because I firmly believe that the iPhone-MacBook combination lies at the core of the Apple experience, and that they're arguably the most important part of that ecosystem. In fact, if you've already made it this far into this video, then you're pretty interested in throwing yourself in the Apple ecosystem. And if you really are, then I highly suggest you start off with the iPhone and work your way up to the MacBook Pro. Now, if your budget allows it and you've sold your old devices and you've saved up enough and you have a small fortune really, then I suggest that you buy the iPhone and the MacBook together because that will be the core experience for the Apple ecosystem, full stop. So yeah, pick up an iPhone, anything from the X series onwards, I highly recommend. And the same with the MacBooks, I would recommend anything from the M1 series onwards. I don't think it's worth paying a higher amount for the Intel-based chips, it's just not worth it. And it's the same with the iPhones. Go for anything which is X and above. So yeah, the MacBook iPhone combo is honestly your best bet when jumping into the Apple ecosystem. Now if you're satisfied with that, you can sign off here and you can just go ahead and purchase your MacBook and your iPhone. And yeah, it's an interesting ecosystem to be in, and yeah, I do recommend it. Now at this stage of this video, if you do want to continue watching, then I'm going to talk about exactly how the iPhone MacBook combo works within the Apple ecosystem and exactly how they're affected by the addition of accessories such as AirTags, the AirPods, and even the iPad. So yeah, I'm going to talk about how these accessories contribute and influence your experience within the Apple ecosystem. So let's get into it. Alright, so at the core of the iPhone MacBook duo is AirDrop. Now AirDrop is a feature which I'm sure you've heard a lot of, and honestly it has come in clutch more times than I can honestly say. So I shoot a lot of B-roll footage on my iPhone 12 Pro. Why? Well, because it's really damn good at it.
And it is so easy to airdrop footage from your iPhone straight to your MacBook and just continue working. It honestly is a seamless experience. And this is not only true for scenarios pertaining to content creation. Sorry about that. As I was saying, this is not only true for scenarios pertaining to being a content creator. As a uni student, it's so very helpful to be able to quickly airdrop notes, PDFs, things like that, straight from my iPad to my MacBook. Or taking a quick pic of notes or anything that the lecturer has written on the board, editing it on my iPhone, and then sending it to my Mac so I can review it on a bigger screen. This is all just honestly really quick and effective, and it just helps on a day-to-day basis. Now I know it is possible to transfer files and content from an Android device straight to a Windows device, but it is just so seamless within the Apple ecosystem. You honestly don't have to think twice about it. Now also, because you essentially use the same ID, the same Apple ID that is, to log into all your devices, information entered into one device will automatically be updated in all your devices. For example, the note-taking and calendar app, which are all built into Apple's software, will always update on all corresponding devices, no matter which device you actually entered it in first. So if I penned in a task on my calendar on the iPhone, then it will automatically update on the calendar on the MacBook and actually remind me of that event or task. You can even use Apple's handoff feature, which allows you to seamlessly transfer, or hand over in this case, activities from one device to another without actually interrupting your work. For example, you're doing some research on your iPhone, now you're browsing the web, going through a PDF online, doing whatever it is you need to do. You can actually hand over this task to your MacBook from your iPhone. And now you've got a bigger screen to work off. And so yeah, I've used this feature over 1,000 times probably, just because of how useful it is and just because of how quick it is. And this is something that Apple does really well. If you're within the Apple ecosystem, there really is very minimal resistance in your workflow, because any task can simply be handed off to another device and you can continue from there. So yeah, it works. And it works really well. The same can also be said for third-party apps. Say you're logged into Spotify on your iPhone as well as on your MacBook. Now say you're at home and you're playing music off your MacBook instead of your iPhone because, well, why wouldn't you? The speakers are so much better. Anyway, say you're playing music off your MacBook and you can actually go into your phone, you can actually go into your iPhone and it will tell you what music is being played on what device. And then it will allow you to actually change that music from your iPhone. So say you've got your MacBook playing music, you're far away, you've got your iPhone with you, you can actually change the music on your MacBook. And that is honestly a feature I didn't know I actually needed until I found out that it was available. So yeah, now you know. So yeah, enabling remote play off your iPhone really does come in handy sometimes. I found that throughout my experience with Apple, it's the little things like that that really go a long way. Seamless integration of devices within the Apple ecosystem, allowing for transitioning of activities, as well as the use of third-party and in-house built apps, honestly makes for a great user experience. And this is something you just can't say for a Windows or even an Android device, because they're just so different from each other. And while they operate on the same platform, it's not all run under the same company, which has a similar idea for all of their devices. Alright, so now let's talk about the accessories. And I use the term accessories because while it is nice to have the Apple Watch, the AirTags, the AirPods Pro, as well as an iPad, now while these accessories are nice to have, I don't feel as though they're actually necessary to experience the Apple ecosystem. Now again, it is important to note that I purchased these devices over a period of a year, because again, I'm a broke college student, and so to pick all of these devices up at the same time is honestly going to be a small fortune. These devices are expensive, and so like I said, if you can't help it, just pick up the iPhone and the MacBook. But yeah, if your budget allows it, then you can pick up these accessories. And speaking of them, let's start off with the Apple Watch. Now I picked up a Series 6 Apple Watch in red, which I really like. And so yeah, with the Apple Watch, it really is a great addition when it comes to just viewing important notifications at the flick of a wrist. Any notification you receive on your iPhone will come through to your Apple Watch. And yeah, it really does come in clutch when you just want to be low-key and you don't want to pull out your phone. You just want to quickly glance over at your watch to see what's up without really drawing attention to yourself. And yeah, it does work. It definitely is very handy, but again, it's not necessary. Now there also is an optimized version of every app on your iPhone on your Apple Watch. This is actually quite crazy, but it is true. You can use the calculator app, you can open up maps to get navigation, as well as even online banking, which is sort of a stretch, But yeah, it is doable, and I feel like it's worth mentioning. Again, it's not going to be that practical with the small screen, but all these apps are there on your Apple Watch, and it's kind of cool. So yeah, as long as your Apple Watch is connected to your iPhone, you get access to navigation as well as all your apps. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Another feature I like about the Apple Watch, and it's probably more renowned for, is the health features. Now you get a heart rate monitor as well as a blood and oxygen monitor on the Series 6, not the SE models. And yeah, it's all there. It tracks all your progress, which you can then see on the app on your iPhone. And yeah, so it works, and if your budget allows it, I definitely recommend getting an Apple Watch. Alright, let's talk about the AirPods. Now next I want to talk about the AirPods Pro, and this is arguably the next best thing you want to get. Honestly, if you've picked up an iPhone and a MacBook in that order, then the next thing I recommend is either AirPods or the Apple Watch. Now this depends on whether you like having all your notifications on your wrist, or if you go out a lot and work in public, then I highly recommend picking up a pair of AirPods. These really come in clutch, whether you're out in uni or you're just at home and you just want to cancel out the background noise and you really just want to focus. A set of AirPods really work well. I mean, they connect to your iPhone, your MacBook, your iPad, whatever, they just work. Even if you're an Android user, just pick up one of these, because they really are the best in the game right now. So yeah, the AirPods Pro, again, they're really decent. Now, the AirTags, again, this is a bit of a stretch. You really don't need these unless you want to flex on people. Now, I purchased these just because I tested and reviewed them. But yeah, if it wasn't for that, I honestly wouldn't really pick up a set of AirTags. But if you do have like a camera bag where you're carrying really expensive equipment and you just want a bit of security, yeah, pick one of these up, chuck it in the bag. You can track it wherever, and it works. Now moving on to the iPad, and this is the 11-inch iPad Pro, and I did pick up the Apple Pencil. Again, this is a bit of a stretch as well, because I'm gonna be honest with you, I haven't actually used this as much. I've done some light photo editing and as well as some light drawing with the Apple Pencil. And again, this is just something you get if you really have everything else and you're just looking to pick up another Apple product. When it comes to the iPad versus the MacBook, I will always, and I mean always, choose the MacBook Pro over an iPad. The iPad, as handy as it is with the M1 processor in it, it's just not a MacBook. And that's just that. This can do everything this can, and so much more. Yeah, you get the ease of use, and it's lighter and whatnot, but it's just not a MacBook. And if you're spending that much money, pick up a MacBook. It'll help you long term. So yeah, that's pretty much all the accessories that I've mentioned. And yeah, like I said, they add their own pros and cons to the Apple experience within the ecosystem. Alright, so now let's talk about some of the bad stuff. And I think I'm going to start off with the MacBook. You see, one thing I've always found kind of counterintuitive or long-winded is multitasking on the MacBook. Because first you have to use 4 fingers, scroll upwards, and then open Mission Control. And then from Mission Control, you need to select a tab which is actually compatible with the multi-window feature, and then select which side you want to actually put it on, the left or the right. And honestly, this process just feels like added steps that are really unnecessary. Especially because on Windows devices, all you need to do is just drag the top of a tab and just chuck it to the side, whichever side you want, and it will automatically set up a multi-window for you. And so with Apple products, it feels like they've just added unnecessary steps just to be different from the rest. I mean, the same can be said for widgets on the iPhone. I mean, they were just introduced on the last major update for iOS. Before that, you couldn't actually use widgets. And every app has to fill out a specific space on the iPhone, which I find kind of funny just because of how OCD they are with it. And this is sort of going off on a tangent, but actually while editing, my MacBook did actually die. It literally just died and I lost about 15 minutes worth of editing footage. I think that might be an isolated case. It's only happened once in the year that I've owned it, but yeah, I think it is worth mentioning here. I don't know what happened, but it just died and it let out this really weird shrieking noise that was kind of crazy, but yeah. I think the next thing I want to talk about is actually AirDrop. And while it is very useful, there's always settings you have to tinker with when you're sending footage and photos to your MacBook or any other device. For example, you have to actually go into the settings and select all photo data just to retain the image quality, the original image quality that was shot on your iPhone. This is something I've never had to do with any Android device. Normally the footage I send is the footage I've shot. This kind of compresses it down a little bit, I think, and so the footage actually, without that setting, isn't the original footage that you've shot. at the same quality. This is kind of stupid, and it's an extra step that I really didn't need. Another thing is actually naming folders and files on an iPhone is so stupid, because first you have to click on the share settings and actually look up the file name and then change it. And this is the same for footage and photos. It's really stupid. And speaking of photos and footage and where it's stored, while it is really good that any footage I take on this will automatically be backed up onto the cloud, which I then can access on my MacBook, the pricing for iCloud is so stupid, because Apple gives you 5 gigs for free, which is kind of nice, and then it starts you off at 99 cents for 100. And I think it just goes up with every, I think, 250 and 500 and 1 terabyte options. I'm not too sure about that, but yeah, they charge you something silly like 99 cents. I mean, you've already invested quite a lot of money with their devices. I think the least they could do is give you like at least 50 gigs for free. I mean, I know Google does 25 gigs of storage for free on Google Drive. I mean, 5 gigs is just, well, it's just a laughable number. And there you have it. The Apple ecosystem, like everything else, isn't perfect. But it does do a lot of things right. And so, to answer the big question of whether or not it's worth switching to the Apple ecosystem in 2022, the answer is, well, yes. Because despite the issues that Apple has within their ecosystem, and don't get me wrong, there are definitely issues there, I think that the pros definitely outweigh the cons. And so yeah, if you are looking to jump into content creation, or just even improve your workflow a little bit, again, this can all be done outside of the Apple ecosystem, but if you have the money and you're looking to invest in the Apple ecosystem, then I definitely do think it's worth it, because despite its problems, it really does work pretty seamlessly. You know, the effortless transfer of data from one device to another, as well as how they integrate and work with one another, it's honestly something pretty interesting, especially in 2022. And so yeah, that's my opinion on the Apple ecosystem in 2022. My name is Prashil. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm sorry that this is a long video. In fact, so long my hat disintegrated and disappeared into the oblivion, but it had to be done. Thank you for watching again. I'll catch you in the next one. Till then, peace.